So there's a new bill making waves in Australia. It was drafted in response to some recent tragic events, and its stated goal is all about promoting social harmony and safety. But here's the thing. Opponents are claiming that in its attempt to heal, it might actually be making the country's divisions even deeper. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the key arguments being thrown at this really controversial piece of legislation.
And really, this is the million-dollar question that critics are asking. They're worried that a bill that's supposed to create social harmony might just be pulling the country further apart. So let's dive in and explore exactly why they think that's the case.
All right, so the first big problem for critics isn't a single detail. It's the very structure of the bill itself. They're arguing that it basically just jams together two totally different and, in their view, completely unrelated issues.
Okay, so what are we looking at? On one side, you've got these much stricter gun laws, which critics say unfairly hit people who are already following the rules. Then, on the other side, it brings in all these new restrictions on hate speech. You can see why this unusual combo has opponents calling the whole thing a mishmash.
And listen to this. According to the former Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop, this wasn't an accident. The critics believe that putting these two things together was a very deliberate, very calculated strategy, and they think it was designed for a specific political reason.
Now let's get to the real philosophical heart of the opposition. We're moving beyond the bill's weird structure and into what opponents see as a major threat to a fundamental democratic principle.
For commentators like Andrew Hastie and Bronwyn Bishop, this is really the core of it. They don't just see these new rules as simple regulations, they see them as a direct challenge to the very idea of free speech that, holds up their entire system of government. This quote really says it all, doesn't it? It captures just how serious their concern is. For them, this isn't just some small policy disagreement. It's an attack on an important pillar of democracy. That's some heavy stuff.
It's really important to get where these commentators are coming from. When they talk about free speech, they don't just mean the right to say whatever you want. To them, it's this core Western idea, going back centuries, that's absolutely vital for a democracy to even function. And, ironically, they say it's essential for the very social harmony the bill claims it wants to create.
Okay, so the next layer of criticism isn't just about what's in the bill, it's about how it's being pushed through Parliament. There's this really strong feeling that the government is just rushing it and completely ignoring the proper procedures.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful accusation coming from a sitting member of Parliament. Andrew Hastie is basically arguing that by fast-tracking this bill, the Prime Minister is just bypassing the democratic checks and balances that are supposed to prevent rushed and potentially really flawed laws.
And this slide lays out exactly what critics say is being missed. Usually, a bill this huge would take months to go through. It would go through committees, public submissions, hearings, tons of debate. All of that stuff is there for a reason, right? It lets lawmakers think through any unintended consequences. But critics say that by cramming all this into just a couple of days, the government is skipping all these vital steps.
So this all leads to a big question about the political motives that critics think are driving this whole thing. They're starting to wonder if the real goal here is unity or something else entirely.
When you look at the strange combination of topics and the super-rushed timeline, you can see why opponents are asking, is the true goal here to actually bring people together, like the government says, or is it to strategically cause a fight for their political opponents?
So, according to the source material, critics see this whole thing as a cynical political move. They're alleging it was deliberately designed to stir up arguments, especially within the opposition parties. The timing is also seen as a way to change the national conversation, to shift focus from other issues. And they argue the policy itself is coming from a place of grief, an emotional reaction, not from clear-headed thinking.
This quote, which was highlighted by columnist Angela K. Mard, just perfectly sums up the whole counterargument. The critics' position is that the government has it completely backwards. They believe that real, lasting social harmony can only ever be built on a foundation of open, free expression, not by shutting it down. So what are the actual real-world consequences that critics are so worried about? Well, they're warning that this bill could lead to some results that are, deeply counterintuitive and pretty damaging.
And this isn't just a local squabble. It's getting international attention. A warning from a senior U.S. official about deeply perverse outcomes adds a whole lot of weight to the fears that are being talked about back home. Let's break down the specific examples that critics keep bringing up. First, they're scared of a situation where someone who criticizes a jihadist could be the one who faces legal trouble while the jihadist themselves is protected.
They also point to cases in the UK where people have apparently been jailed just for posting a tweet. And finally, they bring up the famous case of the athlete Israel Folau, who got into hot water over his religious post. They argue his fate would have been way different and possibly a lot worse under these new laws. It just raises some serious questions about fairness.
All of these criticisms, the weird structure, the rushed process, the potential outcomes, they all build up to one final, massive question that opponents say is being totally ignored.
You know, after all the debating about procedure and free speech, the most fundamental critique is this. Is this law even aimed at the right problem? Is it just a band-aid for the symptom, while the real disease is left completely untreated?
And this is the pivotal question that Bronwyn Bishop leaves us with. For the critics, the real conversation shouldn't be about new gun laws or speech codes. It's about figuring out how the terrible event that started all of this was even possible in the first place. And they argue that until that question is answered, any new law is just completely missing the point.